Ukraine's glory has not died, nor her freedom. These are the words from the first verse in the Ukraine's national anthem. How fitting is this phrase as it relates to the current affairs and spirit of Ukraine and its people. Ukraine has become center stage in global geopolitics. The extraordinary events of the past several months have proven to be an unprecedented demonstration of one country's might and total disregard to international pressure and economic sanctions. Mr. Ambassador, in 2003, the Empire Club had the honor of welcoming former Prime Minister and President Yushchenko to this very podium. In his speech, President Yushchenko, then leader of the opposition, said, "I think that the future of Ukraine today is in the hands of the Ukrainian population. I'm convinced that our people will not make a mistake again. Democracy and freedom will win in Ukraine." Your Excellency, in 2004, I had the honor and privilege of serving on the Canadian diplomatic mission to observe the elections in Ukraine. It was the dawn of the Orange Revolution. Democratic freedom and national pride was alive in the hearts and minds of every citizen in Ukraine and every expat around the world. Mr. Ambassador, I walked through Independence Square, and I've visited small villages in your hometown and your birthplace of Odessa on the northern shores of the Black Sea. I met with Ukrainians of every political stripe and learned one important thing, that all Ukrainians want democratic freedom, a fair and just legal system, and a promising future for future generations. Now, a decade later, especially with the events of recent history, I'm sure that sentiment still exists and is undoubtedly even stronger today. What happened in the past few months in Crimea is of concern to all people in the Western world. There are indeed two sides to this story, and the Empire Club will be hosting the Russian ambassador in a few weeks to hear from that perspective. One thing that is simply fact and that cannot be argued is that a global superpower has exerted extraordinary hegemony over a geopolitical region with relative ease despite unprecedented international disapproval. All of this unfolded while the Olympic Games were happening, while the whole world was in the backyard of Ukraine and in Russia. Some say that this is disgusting. Other people say that this is impressive. Our guest speaker is here to advise us of why Crimea and the events of the past few months are so important to the rest of the world. Ambassador Vadym Prystaiko was appointed as Canada's ambassador in November 2012. He is fluent in Ukrainian, Russian, and English. He's had a distinguished career in the public and private sectors, holds a master's degree from the Ukrainian Academy of Foreign Trade. Prior to joining public life, His Excellency was in the private sector and co-founded one of the internet service providers of his country. In 2007, he was part of Ukraine's NATO negotiating team and served as Director General for NATO in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He's also served in the embassies of Australia and in the United States in Washington, D.C. Despite the unbelievable events of recent days, Ukraine's glory has not died, nor her freedom. Ladies and gentlemen, His Excellency, Ambassador Vadym Prystaiko.
Thank you very much. Great speech. I have nothing to add. It's really distinguished pleasure for me to be here today, to see all of you in this room, to be able to talk to you. As I today asked my former boss, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Trade of Canada, Mr. Pettigrew, there is no pressure at all. Seeing all these people who talked before to the club, who are here today, knowing about the history, and even knowing that all the words are recorded right here so they can be repeated. Although I had a couple of things I wanted to tell you, which I wouldn't be able to repeat in many other occasions, but let's start right now. If I'm allowed by the club, I will take some 20 minutes to talk, and again, if we have a couple of minutes, I will be happy to take questions from the audience, because I understand that issue is very important, and I'm very glad that people are taking interest in the things which are geographically far away, but very close to hearts of many Canadians of Ukrainian origin, and just Canadians. Let me just give you a couple of words. How can I present today's speech? I will have three major parts. First of all, about Ukraine and what happened in Ukraine after the fall of regime of Mr. Yanukovych, and how Ukraine reset itself on the path to Europe, to European integration, which we're pursuing all our 23 years of our independence, and how it worked, or will it work, with the first Ukrainian political government, and how it is launching reforms which hopefully eventually will bring all of us, Ukraine, international community, something good. Then, I can just admit, I know that you will see ambassador of my old friend, Ambassador Mamedov, on 22nd of April. I'm not going to argue with him, at least not in one room, but I can admit this issue of what's Russia doing to us, what we having right now. Somebody believe that what's going on in Ukraine is just threat to the Putin's sort of sovereign democracy he is pursuing and building up in Russia, and as a threat can be forgiven and can be ignored by him, and that everything is going on in Ukraine is just his reaction to the events. That's you to make the opinion on this one. I will try to give you examples and effects for you to consider. And the third one is a simple one: how the international community is reacting to what is going on in Ukraine, and how it's actually hurting the international system which been built over the last 100 of years. So, immediately to the point. You obviously notice that some of the barriers are staying quite active at the winter times. But for those who are been hibernating, I will give you just a layman's sort of course of what's been in Ukraine over the last 3 months. As you know, when Ukraine was about to sign the European European Association Agreement on 20th of November, the government of Yanukovych, of our previous president, former president, changed its course 180% and signed for the deal with Russian Federation $15 billion loan. It's still within the powers of government to decide where their country are going, although people didn't like it, and we believed all the 20 years of our independence that's the proper path of Ukraine and Ukrainian nation. So people came on the streets to protest against this decision. Unfortunately, on the 30th of November, the government decided not to deal with that peacefully, and they just dispersed these nice students' demonstration, quiet and peaceful, with batons and with enormous force unnecessary and needed in this and unexpected in Ukraine. That, in turn, brought close to 1 million Ukrainians, especially Kievans, to the street. That was different. 700 people at least on the streets, that's a serious picture. Unfortunately, government didn't back off. Instead, in some months, they went completely crazy and ordered the shootout on the streets. We lost 103 people already. More than 1,500 people still injured, and we're talking about serious injuries. We're talking about battlefield injuries. Heads, legs amputated, eyes removed, you can imagine the picture. We still have 620-something people on Maidan not properly treated yet. What happened then, more or less, Yanukovych resurfaced in Russia with all the money he can grab with them on the way. He read the statements being prepared by his Russian new masters, calling for the aggressor to come and reinstate him on the throne. As simple as that. Unfortunately for us, Russia could not miss this chance. They came to the Crimea, grabbed whatever they want. I will come to this a bit later. And now they are mounting their forces on the borders of Ukraine around the north and east. All things are more or less known. I'd like us to note one simple detail, but I believe this fact is very important. It's been repeatedly brought to attention by Russian propaganda. I'd like all of you to know, and if you not agree, please let me know. We are talking about legality of Ukrainian government. Many people, including Canadian government now, are talking about interim government in Ukraine. My point is we still have the same government, at least the same parliament, with all this glory and beauty. We have Party of Regions of Yanukovych trying to find their way. We even have communists in the parliament. So all this beautiful composition of people with extremely different views are in the parliament, and they actually elected the new speaker and created new government. The only two ministers are still acting ministers, my minister and Minister of Defense. We're expecting the president to be elected on 25th of May, thus completing the cycle of legalization of the new Ukrainian government. Another question whether we'll be allowed to have these elections, or how the new president will be recognized. At least our Russian neighbors told already that they are not going to recognize the new president. Another very important moment is the so-called agreement of 21st of February. You know, the president of Yanukovych with three leaders of opposition is a different question whether they really represented the people who gathered on Maidan, but let's put it aside. They signed the agreement with some ideas how to get out of the situation, which was already after people being shot by snipers on the streets. The decision was small but very short agreement, which was signed by Yanukovych, three leaders of opposition, and three ministers of foreign affairs, Poland, Germany, and France, as the sort of guarantors of this agreement. The only guy who didn't sign the agreement was Russian representative. This fact is completely forgotten by Russians now. They are referring to this agreement as the basis which we should respect and be abided by, but at the same time, they do not remember that they were the only ones who were not happy in the very first place and never signed it. This thing, with the first clause, was about returning to the constitution 2004 in Ukraine, which balancing the powers of president and parliament. President Yanukovych never signed in the law of returning to the constitution, by this breaching the #1 position in the agreement, which he promised to fulfill in 24 hours. It never happened, and everything, the whole hell broke up. So what we have now, you know, or everyone, you know more or less what is happening in Ukraine. The first positive results return to this more balanced system, renewing the negotiations with European Union, even the signing the association agreement, although partially, were overshadowed by the submarginal economic situation and development. We have fall of GDP 3%. We have huge amount of debt. We're talking about $72, $73 billion this year. We immediately need $36 billion to repay our immediate debts. We have unbalanced budget, and yes, we do have social complications like separatism. You can see from the TV. We have divided loyalties within our own people. We have radicalization of certain sectors of society. All of this is true. The government of Mr. Yatsenyuk, our new prime minister, he himself referred to the government as a kamikaze government, and they have quite simple task. It is take unpopular and painful steps to avoid the default of Ukraine, balance the state budget, reduce public spending, hold fair, transparent presidential elections, and all of them very easy things to accomplish just in 2 months. Proposed by many people, including Russians, federalization of Ukraine, second official language, will hardly, in my view, reinforce Ukrainian statehood. And we understand that actually it's not Russia's business how we are running our own country. But this idea is also considered. We won't be probably going for the federalization. We're a unitary state, unlike Canada and Russia itself. We're unitary states, but we will probably give more powers to the regions. We call it decentralization of the powers. People will have to decide how they will make their budgets, education, even language, many things, just to cool down the hot heads we still have in our runaway regions. We will have to stabilize the state finance system. Sharp cuts and saving the budget funds. We will review our taxation system and reduce subsidies and benefits. We're looking forward for the IMF program. We're talking about $18 billion immediately. I hope to hear the announcement next Tuesday, maybe Wednesday. The mission has already finished its work in Ukraine, IMF mission. When I talk about really sharply cuts, I'm talking about real sharp things. We are reducing our government staff 10% already. I have to tell you, I feel it myself. We're talking about 24,000 bureaucrats around Ukraine. That's a huge number. Most of these people well qualified for the job, educated. We can't afford them anymore. We're talking the same about subsidies. You can imagine we were subsidizing the special mining needs, mostly mining needs in our eastern parts. Extremely sensitive question in Ukraine. We have to cut it at least 10%. I'm just expecting what would happen next when the people will understand that we are not going to feed, because they're, with miners, you probably all remember what Thatcher, as the Prime Minister of Britain, had to face in some 1970s. That's what we have right now. Talking about IMF loan, we hope that it's not only bringing the money as itself, but it's also reinforce the image of Ukraine as a more attractive investment opportunity, and will bring some more things on bilateral basis. There are things, including Canada. We are talking about at least $220 million being offered by Canada to Ukraine. Some people are criticizing that's not enough. No, it's not enough for us. But if you compare to what, for example, our friends from south of Europe made, like $1 billion pledge, and if you compare it to the Canadian market, you will see that proportionally Canada gave at least 2-3 times more than Americans did, and could do much more. I'm really proud to be here as ambassador to Canada and see this support from Canadian government and Canadians. We will have to do many things. We were talking about our attachment to the particular pipe. That's our biggest problem with our energy security. We are consuming around 50 billion cubic meters of gas annually. All of this we are receiving from, more or less, everything we are receiving from Russian Federation. By rerouting the pipelines in European Union, if we manage to reach the agreement, we'll be able to supply 26 billion cubic meters. 28 of them, 26, we still have to buy with Russians. And that's a very good example of how the hypocrisy in Russia is working. We have this reduced price for the gas, $100, which was our pay, or Russian sort of pay for the stationing of their fleet in Crimea. Just the day before yesterday, Prime Minister of Russian Federation, Medvedev, told that because, I'm quoting him, because of changed global reality, they don't need to rent base anymore in Ukraine because Crimea is not Ukrainian anymore. That's the way they're resolving their issues. Now they believe that they're territory. Why would they pay? And they immediately, effective yesterday, they increased price $100. We already were about to go to Guinness Book for the record of the price for the gas. Now we definitely were unbeaten in this particular regard. We have to do many things. I don't want to bore you with all the details. Judicial reform, law enforcement, extremely important, especially how to deal with the people with special squads, which were firing at people and their own people, snipers, how to rebuild the system of riot police. We expect, and we'll be talking about these reforms and re-educating people with Canada as well. We will take some examples of RCMP and FBI and other international services which prove to be effective and more democratic, liberal, whatever you prefer to call it. We will have many things, and one of the important things we just done, again, very difficult, we disarmed all the armed groups in Ukraine. It's very difficult to do. As soon as people went through revolutionary times, they've been shot at, they won this victory, they wanted to see the fruits. Now we have to tell them, thank you very much, please, return the weapons to military, to police. This is what's happening in Ukraine right now. What's going on in Russia, and what happened to Crimea. Regardless of the rhetoric they're using, and you will hear a lot of the things, I'm not going to argue or repeat. The one thing is quite obvious. It's not just betraying their closest neighbor, brotherly, as they used to call nation. We're talking about rewriting the whole international system, proving that there is still a right of stronger, and the nuclear states can do whatever they want to do. I have to remind you that in 1991, Ukraine had on its territory the third biggest arsenal of nuclear weapons. This arsenal was bigger than Chinese, Britain, and France together. We gave it up, and in return, we've been promised security guarantees from 5 countries. One of these countries invaded Ukrainian territory, and one more country, China, abstained during the voting in the United Nations. So you can now understand how much the cost, the paper on which we signed, if we rephrase the Bismarck's words about the papers on which the agreements with Russia are signed. So that's the reality. We are not protected. We are not a member of any bloc, and we are under occupation of our neighbor. I mean, many things being done by Russia. Again, I don't want to go in details. When we have so-called Putin's tourists coming in numbers and helping people to go for the referendums for federalization, local ones who are not happy with being part of Ukraine. We're talking about just commandos. We are trying to pick them up one by one with weapons, with literature, those people who are trying to ignite the unrests. And unfortunately, we have to admit, it is working. They are pouring 100 times more money in propaganda. And it is a very bad figure, but I have it in my mind. I can't get rid of it. 39% of Ukrainians are receiving the news about their own political events, about their own country from the Russian TV. I'm not talking about being covered by TV. That's 92% of territory. We're talking about people just getting the signals or anything, any events, any facts from Russian TV. It's very difficult to fight. That's how this part of the globe is constructed. What Crimea for us now? We were talking about Crimea, Crimea is a quite big territory. It's 2 million Ukrainians. 2 million. It's a very big chunk of our population. It's around 4.3%. It's 3.6, 3.7% of Ukrainian GDP. Share in export and import is a bit less, 1.5, 0.6. But what really took a blow is energy security of Ukraine. The gas fields around Crimea and the Black Sea are very important to us, extremely critical important. We estimated around 170 billion cubic meters of natural gas, 47 million tons of oil, and 18 million tons of gas condensate. At the end of 2013, Ukraine developed only 4% of these capacities. And now our companies were producing annually around 7 million cubic meters of gas. 1.2 were consumed in Crimea, the rest was exported to mainland Ukraine. Now all of these wells in the hands of Russia. We are talking about gas, but we're also talking about infrastructure. There are some drilling platforms, hundreds of millions of dollars. Worse, we are talking about $1 billion of military equipment, banks, schools, kindergartens, infrastructure, build everything. We're now seeing that these gas and oil companies have been nationalized, and we see the only buyer, Gazprom, next day immediately. And at the same time, from others, as I mentioned to you, 100% rise in the price. The situation is not easy, but I'll give you another example, very close to Canadian hearts. We bought in Canada, we paid $260 million to build the satellite with MDA company. It's already done. We scheduled the launch. We can do it because the control system was in Crimea. We have satellite. We have everything. We can't use it. We can't control it. Now we have to find a place where we'll be able to control this communication satellite. We postponed the launch until at least July. We hope that by this time we will find the capacity of controlling from other parts of Ukraine. There is the radio telescope, third biggest telescope in the world. It is in Crimea, been now taken by Russians. Do we have anything good from annexation? I don't want you to see the picture in gloom and doom. Do we have anything positive? Yes, you know, we have accelerated maturation of civil society. Whether, I mean, it is serious balance to what we lost, but that's the reality. Our society is different. We went through many cycles, much more than our Russian neighbors. It is painful. You today recall the 2004. Now we have another cycle. We shortened the periods, but we have more and more people involved in the political system. And you know, our society is changing. Russians, for example, playing all the sensitive strings they can find around the globe. They immediately talking neo-Nazis, fascists, or you don't like anti-Semites. Yes, Ukrainians are anti-Semites. I have to tell you a couple of interesting facts. We had on Maidan, on the Square of Independence, the hundreds of people fighting there, they divided themselves by hand. We have Jew 100, just made up by local Jews. We have unexpected turn from the Muslims, from the Crimean Peninsula Tatars. They invited Ukrainian Orthodox to have their services in the mosques because these people deprived from the churches, they can have their services anymore. We have this interesting letter from Ukrainian Jewish organization to Mr. Putin, where these people are saying, when they're arguing about the anti-Semitism in Ukraine, they're saying, most likely, Mr. Putin, you probably mixed Ukraine and Russia, where Jewish organizations have noticed the growth last year of anti-Semitism. Our few nationalists are under control of civil society and the new government of Ukraine, and all of us, we can take care of it. We know how to do it. We've been through it. But that's in Russia, neo-Nazism, which is encouraged by your intelligence agencies. So immediately coming to what actually the international community is doing, how it is perceiving the events in Ukraine, what it can do and what it is doing, whether it is doing enough or not, that's a different question. We had in United Nations just a couple of days, the UN resolution on territorial sovereignty and integrity of Ukraine. That's the first time when the international community was so united. We had 100 countries voted for this resolution. We have 11 countries who actually voted against. I'll give you the list. Russia, Belarus, Bolivia, Venezuela, Armenia, Zimbabwe, Cuba, Nicaragua, Northern Korea, Sudan, and Syria. That's nations who actually decided to support Mr. Putin in his endeavor. Nobody else. Instead of going for the reforms I've been just describing to you, now what we have to do is we have to enforce our military. We are trying to increase to find money for this. We increased by 15% the money we find funds for the military. We are having exercises, 7 exercises this year, including Canadians. Canadians are coming for the exercises in Ukraine this year, just to boost up the capabilities of the Ukrainian army. We have many different programs, simple, complicated. People do on their own, governments are doing. I'll just give you a couple of examples. The medical team is already in Ukraine, Canadian medical team. People are working pro bono. They're coming to Ukraine to see how can they help to treat these people on Maidan, which are still injured. What sort of help is needed? Equipment, doctors, everything. They will assess the situation, will come back. Canada, as I mentioned, already pledged 220 million. Another million was given to National Bank to support its activities. European Union, IMF, as I mentioned. So many countries are trying to do things, trying to get together the accumulated help and come to this. Last thing about Canada's help. You know, your Prime Minister went to Ukraine on 22nd of last month. He's still the only Prime Minister, the only leader who came to Ukraine from G8, G7 now countries. The Minister of Foreign Affairs was the first Minister of Foreign Affairs to come to Ukraine to show the support. And what I can expect from him, I met Prime Minister last Monday, that Canada will also help with observation of the presidential elections on the May of 25th. You had a great experience. Twice Canada set a record of sending the biggest ever observation team. I believe that this great experience has to be put into a good way and help to show that elections are really fair and free and democratic, and we have legalized government. So thank you very much, and the last word I'd like to use is just sincerely thank you to the Ukrainian community of Canada. That's probably the most important part. I told this before, I know. It is dramatic part, now it's very tough time. I'm not that sure as my president 2004 was that from this now it will be much better. I sincerely hope, and with your help, with Canada's help, with our friends around the globe, we will do it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. So, as I mentioned earlier, we're now going to hear from Eugene Melnyk, who's going to essentially thank the ambassador, but also provide you with a perspective from a Ukrainian Canadian. And it's not so much as it is for everybody in the room as it is as a message to the government of Ukraine and the position of Ukrainian Canadians. Many of people in this room know who Eugene Melnyk is. He's the owner and chairman of Ottawa Senators and Ottawa Sports and Entertainment. But he's also a philanthropist. He's spent more than a decade with not-for-profit charitable initiatives called Help Us Help the Children, dedicated to improving the quality of life of more than 100,000 children living in orphanages throughout Ukraine. Mr. Melnyk has given millions and millions of dollars to charitable endeavors in Canada and around the world. And I'd ask you to please welcome him to this podium. Mr. Melnyk.
Well, thank you very much, Noble. Good afternoon, everyone. First things first is, Mr. Ambassador, on behalf of the Empire Club, the entire head table, and all of us guests here in attendance this afternoon, I wish to thank you for sharing the insight and the perspective of you and your government on the ongoing crisis in Ukraine. Without question, this has been and will continue to be an extremely difficult time for the people of Ukraine and for those of us who are deeply connected to your country. Ambassador Prystaiko provided us with, this afternoon, with plenty of interesting insight. But we need to keep something in mind, that he is a very good ambassador and consummate diplomat. And by definition, there are certain things he possibly cannot say as an ambassador. But those rules don't apply to me. While the ambassador has touched upon many of Ukraine's challenges and opportunities, I wish you to allow me a few minutes to give my unvarnished and very specific views on the Russian military and Mr. Putin's invasion of Crimea. First things first, there was a time when I actually thought Vladimir Putin was kind of a cool guy. I'm sure you've all seen this photo of him online. He is deep in the Russian wilderness riding a horse, bare-chested.
We can get that on the screen.
You've seen this, right? If not, it's on the internet.
I can get it on the screen.
Can you? Ah, it's very, rather attractive. And you've seen the photos of him holding a tranquilized tiger, and then a photo of him driving a Formula One kit car. It is a kit car, by the way, around the Kremlin. Thank God for the internet. I have lots of fun playing around with it, looking at this guy. But this is a guy that's laced with testosterone and showing all the classic signs of a guy going through a midlife crisis. No kidding, right? But then, when I started hearing these things about his Ukrainian ambitions, I decided to take a hard look at Putin, and I asked myself, is this guy for real? Well, let's first go to the picture of him on the horse. Vlad, I know something about horses. That horse is actually 3/4 Arabian and a little bit of a quarter house. On my farm, we have those kind of horses. They're horses to teach little kids and give pony rides. In fact, I have a kitty horse named Pickles, and he looks just like this one. Sorry, pal, you're riding a kitty's pony. So, on top of that is the photo of Putin riding a shark. You saw this one, right? Who rides sharks? Put that one up for fun. Yes, you heard me. He's riding a shark. Disneyland. If you think I'm joking, I'm not. This is actually an official government photo issued by Russia's Ministry of the Executive. And the official cut line to the photo reads, quote, Vladimir Putin leads his nation from the front, not a desk. Huh? The Russian government seriously thinks the Western world buys some of this stuff, but sadly the truth, Mr. Putin, is the Western world knows that you're a cheat and a liar, period. So let's move on to more serious matters. As a Ukrainian Canadian, I grew up surrounded by a tight-knit Ukrainian community. My best friends were and are Ukrainian. I went to Ukrainian school, Ukrainian Scouts. My family priest, Father Terry, who delivered grace, is also Ukrainian. The history of my family is one defined by survival. My parents grew up in a small town called Chernivtsi in western Ukraine. They lived through oppressive times that were a result of the German Nazis and a Soviet dictator named Stalin. My parents also survived the Holodomor, and for those who are unfamiliar with the Holodomor, please allow me to give you a 2-minute history lesson that will astound you. Holodomor is a Ukrainian word, when translated, means extermination by hunger. Between 1932 and 33, in just 2 short years, the premeditated actions of one Russian dictator named Joseph Stalin killed 7.5 million Ukrainians. It was a terrible time in Ukrainian history, and one all Ukrainians rightfully and painfully choose never to forget. To put it starkly, the Holodomor was one of the greatest genocides in human history. This historical context of Ukraine is critically important to understand because the people of Ukraine, my parents included, struggled with chronic oppression, first by Stalin, then the Nazis, and now with Putin's regime. Where Mr. Putin is making a colossal mistake is in grossly underestimating the resolve of this generation of young Ukrainians who have known nothing but freedom. Putin chose to invade a neighboring country, use military force to physically and verbally threaten the people of Ukraine, show complete disregard for Ukraine's constitutional rights, and thumb his nose at well-established and well-understood international laws and treaties. Putin's actions are the absolute antithesis of what we teach our children. Simply put, the guy's a bully. Well, congrats to you, Vlad, picking on a defenseless country, ill-prepared to fight you, and just beating up on them. Do you truly believe that you make every Russian proud? When some of Ukraine's high-ranking military officials go missing, we should have no illusions on the type of person we are dealing with. This, ladies and gentlemen, by any standard, is extreme behavior. So extreme that our Prime Minister has categorized Putin's actions as something not seen since World War II. So extreme that both our Prime Minister and Minister John Baird have referred to Russia's occupation of Crimea as being no different than Hitler and the Third Reich's annexation of Czechoslovakia. Ladies and gentlemen, when we have world leaders comparing Putin's behavior and actions in Crimea to Hitler and the Third Reich, we have ourselves a major, major international crisis. In business, I often stress accountability. When decisions are taken, be them good or bad, ultimately one person stands accountable for the outcomes. In a particular case of Russia's illegal occupation of Crimea, one man, Mr. Putin, holds sole accountability. This man is your penultimate modern-day aggressor. To put it mildly, Mr. Putin is deceptive, corrupt, and an irrational tyrant. Someone who on many levels is single-handedly threatening the geopolitical balance of our world economy. Thankfully, international solidarity against Mr. Putin continues to strengthen daily. And on this point, I do have to thank our Prime Minister and Foreign Affairs Minister John Baird, who both have been assertive and very influential in coordinating the international response to this crisis. The efforts of the international community over this past week alone are the greatest indication to date of the severity of the crisis. We now have all 28 members of NATO organizing themselves to shore up significant military assets for potential deployment. As we move into the next phase of this crisis, we ask of our Canadian government to firstly support the rearming of Ukraine's military through the supply of military hardware. They will repay the debt. They just need the tools. And secondly, support the establishment of a more permanent presence of NATO forces in Baltic states and other nations neighboring Russia. And third, to provide an economic backstop to a country bankrupt by Yanukovych and Putin. So, Mr. Ambassador, thank you again for being with us here today. I truly believe that your speaking to us gives everyone a better understanding of what Ukraine is facing. As you rightfully pointed out, Canada is home to 1.2 million Ukrainian Canadians. We have the largest Ukrainian diaspora in the world, and with that reality comes a responsibility for us to act and support the people of Ukraine. We will continue to work closely with the Prime Minister and his cabinet to identify as many opportunities as we can to work with you and your government. We are fully committed to doing our part in preserving Ukraine's sovereignty, political independence, and territorial integrity. And we will not stop until this is achieved. I'd also like at this time to thank all of you for attending and supporting the Empire Club's efforts this afternoon to host the ambassador. Again, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Melnyk. You're going to have to remind me to never take you up on a trip to Moscow. I don't think I'll do that. As I mentioned earlier, His Excellency would be pleased to take questions. We have about 10 minutes. So if you have any questions, there are 2 microphones roaming around here. Please put up your hand. Please state your name and the company that you're with, and either Mr. Melnyk or His Excellency will take your questions.
Mr. Ambassador, my name is Zenon Potishny, Canada-Ukraine Chamber of Commerce. I figured that video said that this is platform for some discussion, so I thought I'll throw something on the floor to get a little bit of discussion. And since I see some members of SERBA here and even board members of SERBA, I would like to bring into your attention some of the statements that were made by SERBA. For those that don't know who SERBA is Canada, Eurasia, Russia Business Association. And the statement said, we appeal to the government of Canada and the Russian Federation to exercise balance, restraint, discretion, and care when considering their actions in respect to the current crisis surrounding Ukraine. We urge both governments to bear in mind that damage would be inflicted on the excellent and growing economic relations between the 2 countries by punitive measures taken by either side. As Mr. Melnyk already mentioned, Mr. Prime Minister and his team has done an excellent job on behalf of Canada in supporting Ukraine. And we were just in Ukraine last week with Mr. Grot from Canada, President of Canada-Ukraine Chamber of Commerce, Ukrainian-Canadian Congress, and Mr. Choly, President of World Ukrainian Congress. And any meeting that we had within Ukrainian government, everybody started every meeting with thanks to Canadian government for their full support.
Your question, please.
Yeah, sorry. What I would like to say to Serbia to reconsider retraction of that statement, number one. Number two, I would suggest that perhaps Serbia would visit Mr. Putin and his government and ask him to return Crimea back to Ukraine, including all the stolen property, assets, exploration licenses to the rightful owners, and then talk about balance and restraint by the Canadian government. I would like your comments on that.
This statement is so good, I can't comment on it more. The only thing I'd like to add that there are two approaches. One is short-sighted approach, that we have money in our hand and let's keep them. Another one is how to look in the future and understand if we have order, if we have international balance of the interests and they're obvious and transparent, then I believe the business can have more and can operate peacefully. And that's actually, at least this idea is shared. I talked to Minister Barrett about this particular statement of Serbia, and yesterday to Minister of Immigration, Mr. Alexander. And that's what they told, that, yeah, I have to just to quote here. One of my colleagues, ambassador of some European state, just recently mentioned that Prime Minister of Canada is becoming leader of free world because of the very modest behavior of the southern friend in the times of crisis. That's true. The Canadian government is staying and is saying to the business, you're right, nobody wants to lose the jobs and money. At least Ukrainians do not want. And if we can to restart the relations with Russia on a civilized manner, that all of us have to do. For this, just simple thing, take off your troops, leave whatever which does not belong to you, and start normal, peaceful, civilized relations. Thank you.
Over there. We have a question in the corner. Your name, please?
My name is George Harabar. My parents came from the Ukraine years ago. They had to flee Ukraine. They lost everything. Fortunately, the Ukrainian people have developed smart, intelligent people from their children that went to universities, got law degrees, medical degrees, accounting degrees, and flourished in other countries, including Canada. Unfortunately, my father ended up in northern Saskatchewan, where it was minus 100 below zero, and the snowdrifts were higher than the ceiling. Oh, I dreaded those days. One difficulty I have when I see this crisis develop are the Ukrainian people themselves. They've always been oppressed. They've been mostly poor. They've experienced poverty. They've experienced oppression. Their children are affected. I see this developing now in Ukraine, but to a much higher level. You mentioned in your speech that you will be dividing the powers to the local communities to develop their own regions. And the first thing that comes to my mind is divide and let Russia conquer. How do you oppose to address this issue which has been going on for centuries?
Thank you. I don't want you to think that Ukrainians were always in that tragic situation. I want you to see the picture, which is, that's the land which possesses a third of world's black soil, the most fertile soils in the world. That's probably, it draws so much interest from all our neighbors, Russians and everybody you name around the globe. That's why we're so attractive for many oppressors to come. By 11th century, Ukraine was probably, and as Kiev Rus, was probably the most powerful nation before our Mongol friends came, Genghis Khan And you know, this, from that time, the Moscow rise like 800 years ago, so many things changed. So far, we've been going through different times, but mostly difficult times. Whether we have to bring more, as you mentioned, to bring more powers to regions, yes, we believe that time is difficult. This move can be used by separatists, and they're already using it, but that's what the old civilized nations are doing, giving more powers to the people and less to the governments. It is not an easy decision, but we will do it, and I believe that's the right path.
We have time for one more Ukrainian speech, but 3 more questions.
Or 3 more questions.
I'll keep it short and sweet. John Moskalik, Canada-Ukraine Chamber of Commerce. Your Excellency, with the annexation of Crimea and the ongoing occupation, and the knowledge that Russian troops have mobilized on the border, the northeastern border of Ukraine, I pose 2 very quick questions. One, is there any possibility in the realistic future that Crimea will ever be returned to Ukraine? And second, is there a real and true threat of further Russian mobilization onto the sovereign territory of Ukraine?
I believe that we are not going to fight with people of Crimea. The majority of them wanted to be with Russia for some reasons, propaganda, or they believe they belong to great Russian nation and they want to be back, and they represent the majority, 50-something% of population Crimea. What we are going to do, what's idea is just to be the country we all of us wanted to be, modern, democratic, prosperous, and show Crimeans, the people, that's your place. As our Prime Minister mentioned, and addressed to them, please keep Ukrainian passports and keep Ukrainian soil. You will be back. We're not going to make it by force, but we'll live together. You know, physically, it's not even attached to Russia. It's attached to Ukraine. Whatever Russians are saying about presenting, gifting by Khrushchev, all the things, it's not even physically attached to Russia. And on the probability of Russians to come in further, we have 100,000 troops on our border. Russians are talking about that's mere exercise. Why would it be so all the fuss about just 100,000 troops? It's more than all Ukrainian military, but that's just a simple thing for them. We've been called paranoid many, many times. When I was in NATO trying to negotiate Ukraine's path into NATO, we've been asked many, many times, why would you be so paranoid? Who's your enemy? They're your friends. They will never come. Now we see them on our border, on our own land. Recently, Mr. Mamedov, who is going to talk to you, as I mentioned, 22nd of April, came to my embassy to sign the book of condolences for the people who've been shot by the order of President Yanukovych. Next day, he came on TV, on CTV News, and told that the legitimate president, Mr. Yanukovych, have to be reinstated in Ukraine, and we are trying to help Ukrainians by doing so. They are saying all sorts of things. Recently, he told that the idea of Russian occupation is something which will insult any intelligent Canadian. Last Minister of Foreign Affairs statement was, if somebody is thinking about Russian troops invading Ukraine, they should be prescribed painkillers. That's all the things they're using, you know, the words, they're not diplomatic, which we used to. They're just day-to-day. That's how the machine is working and how they're preparing themselves. Putin he's drunk with power and with popularity. 82% of average Russians are so happy that their president is flexing muscle. He's a cool guy, macho, taking whatever he likes. I'm curious, how can he withdraw troops? How can he tell them, no, guys, thank you very much, war is over, go back to barracks? How can he sell it back to his people that after staying in Ukrainian territory in Crimea and in our northern and eastern borders, now it's finished and we have no business in Ukraine anymore? That's what bothers us, and that's what given us the thinking that he'll be coming even further.
Thank you. We have time for one last question.
Hi, Your Excellency. I'm Larissa Hedmanchuk from the Ukrainian Professional Business Association. I'm just wondering your opinion on how we in the Western diaspora can best help Ukraine. Is it helping support the economic recovery of Ukraine? Is it helping restore the territorial integrity of Crimea? Is it both? And what would be the priority of the Ukrainian people in this transitional government?
Thank you very much. I have to tell you that we have to, Ukrainians within Ukraine, have to do all the job. We can expect help and assistance and shared expertise. If it can be done, many things, I just don't want to waste your time. So many people will come in with so many bright ideas. When we have to have recognition, that the Canadian government, the first one. You remember in 1991, the Canadian government was the first one after Poland to recognize Ukraine's independence. I had the chance in my life to talk to Prime Minister Brian Mulroney at the time. He told me, you know what, I was the first to recognize. I said, nah, not really. Okay, it was Poland, but the time difference, yeah, you know, it works in the other way around. Anyways, we were close. Yes, Canada was always on the very front of recognizing and helping Ukraine. Over 23 years, Canada was given $410 at least million for assistance. Ukraine is the only country in Europe which is still on the list of technical assistance. And this assistance will be, we just talked to Canadian government, will be redirected to the things which are needed immediately, right now, right away. Anything can help. Before coming here, I met with Canadian company who is about to invest as much as $1 billion. I hope these people won't correct me. They're sitting over there. I'm not going to name names, but we are talking about serious business. We are opening up for business, and by creating these opportunities to everybody to come and build at least something like that. Yesterday in Carleton University, I was asked, how do you see Ukraine in 10, 15, 20 years? What's the role model for this? The ambassador of Poland was sitting just in front of me. I told, you know what, that's the guy. That's Poland, probably the best chance for us in 10, 15 years, 20 years. Then maybe Canada, something like that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. As a token of our appreciation, I'd like to present you with this book. It's Who Said That? Memorable Notes, Quotes, and Anecdotes, a selection of 100 years of Empire Club speeches. And incidentally, in 2000, President Putin spoke at this club. And his quote is in there. Thank you. I'd like to thank Eugene Melnick for being our main sponsor today, and the Canada-Eurasia-Russia Business Association for being our information partner at today's event. At your desks or at your tables, you have a list of upcoming events. We have the Federal Minister of Aboriginal Affairs and Northern Development coming next week, or on the 14th of April. And in all seriousness, the Russian ambassador is coming on April 22nd. And I'd urge you to consider attending that event, to hear that side of the story, but to also provide your views and express your concern with what is happening in the world. On Wednesday, April 23rd, we have Rob Pritchard, Chairman of BMO and Chairman of Metrolinx, here at the club. We're very grateful for the National Post, our print media sponsor, Van Valkenburg, for our AV. This meeting will be carried and aired on Rogers TV, and we are grateful for your ongoing support. We're on Twitter and on Facebook, and our website is www.empireclub.org. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Your Excellency. We hope to see you again soon. This meeting is now adjourned.